Hi everyone, my name is Mackin. I'm an evolutionary anthropologist, and today I'm going to be answering your questions mostly about mating, which is my special expertise, but also about evolution in general. And that's exhibited by our first question from Tanya, who asks, from an evolutionary standpoint, why do mental health states such as depression, OCD, etc. exist? How is it useful? One hypothesis to be familiar with is the analytical rumination hypothesis, which posits that depression is an adaptive response to complex problems. What do you want to do when you're depressed? You want to lay around, right? Conserve energy, rest, and you also really want to think, right? Many of you will have been depressed, and one of the classic states of being depressed is thinking through the things that are depressing you over and over and over again from different angles. And some psychologists have hypothesized that this is an adaptive response to complex problems. Essentially, you have something really challenging that you're dealing with. And so your brain and body is like, okay, let's rest and let's focus on this problem and think it through until it's solved. And it's plausible that in our ancestry, if you were dealing with a complex social or even environmental problem, it would behoove you to conserve calories and focus those calories on fixing that problem. And that may be to some extent what depression is. I think it's a good hypothesis. However, I will note, I mean, you are talking about mental health states in general, mental illness in general, that we shouldn't expect to be able to explain all mental illness with evolutionary frameworks. In the same way that you wouldn't expect to be able to explain all physical illnesses from an evolutionary framework. Some things are just non adaptive. And that actually brings us to a second question from Seb, who asks, from an evolutionary standpoint, how can asexuality be understood? What mechanisms might explain its existence and persistence? Again, it's not necessarily the case that everything has an evolutionary benefit. In the case of asexuality, some have hypothesized that, in general, non-heterosexual sexualities may motivate the investment in kin. So maybe if you abstain from mating yourself, you can focus on investing resources in your nephews and nieces who share some of your genes, not as many as a direct descendant would. But if you invest in them, you're still in a indirect way reproducing, in the sense that you're still supporting copies of your own genes being passed into the next generation. However, that's very speculative, and again, I'll refer back to the earlier point, which is that not everything is adaptive. Not everything can be explained by evolution. In fact, there are many things that are probably just not adaptive. But it's a good question. Omar Lyles asks, are tall men more likely to cheat? Do they cheat more often? I'm not aware of any data showing this directly, but if I had to guess based on other data that I have seen, I would say yes. So there is data showing that more muscular men are more likely to cheat, and muscles are similar to height. It's a proxy for male bodily attractiveness. There's some data suggesting that when there's a physical attractiveness gap in a relationship, when the man is more attractive than the woman, he is less satisfied in the relationship. And we know from our data and others that relationship dissatisfaction predicts infidelity. And again, height, that's a pretty close proxy for male attractiveness. So I would say that yes, if a man is taller, he probably has more opportunity to have an affair. And even just by virtue of that, he's going to be more likely to have one. It's a good question. I would love to see a study directly investigating it. But if I had to hypothesize, I would put a lot of chips on yes. Yasoda asks, how common or successful are relationships between older women and younger men? And is there an ideal age range/age difference? Well, in terms of ideal age range/age difference, the ideal is as close to zero as possible. You really want to be with someone who's around your own age, all else being equal. I wouldn't date purely based on this, right? If love is love, and if you guys have an age difference, but everything else is going well, I wouldn't look at general average statistics to guide your decision. But all else being equal in the abstract, yeah, you don't want to have an age gap. Age gaps are correlated with bad outcomes such as divorce. As far as how common it is for an older woman to be dating a man who's much younger, it's more common than a lot of people think. So I would say that an age gap is real after, like a couple years difference. That's when it's like, okay, there's actually an age difference there. It's not just approximately the same age. And in about 15% of relationships, women are 2 years or more older than their male partner in marriages. So it's not that uncommon, but it's not common either. And with each year you tack onto that, it decreases it decreases precipitously. So you don't really see very many big age gaps between men and women where the woman is older. You don't really see those very often at all. Very, very small percentages there. Good question. Emma asks, does social media and other media skew men's idea of who's actually in their league? Very good question. I'm not aware of any direct research on this. There is research that suggests that social media and maybe other media skews our perception of who are our competitors. So it certainly seems to be the case that when someone uses social media more, they tend to have more body image issues, and they also tend to spend more time in the mirror, more time beautifying themselves. And one common hypothesis for this is that if you go on social media every day, you're bound to see incredibly beautiful people all the time. Beautiful people with the same gender as you, in the same age group as you, who just look much better than you. And if you're just exposing yourself to that over and over and over again, your mind, which evolved for an environment where, you maybe knew a couple hundred people, isn't able to process the fact that these are not actual competitors in your real life. So you look at them and you think, oh my gosh, these are the ladies in the neighborhood, or these are the guys in the neighborhood. This is what I have to compete with. I better start looking better. It's possible and plausible, as you hypothesize here, that it may also activate your perception of options. So you go on social media every day, you see incredibly good-looking people of the opposite gender or your desired gender, and your brain thinks, oh, that's my environment, these are my options. And so you get a misperception of your own mate value. It's plausible to me. I would say that the only thing is that it's unclear whether those social media avatars would be perceived as options or perceived as just more rejection, because there's no reciprocity in that relationship. With some of this more interactive media, right, it's plausible that men who are paying for the experience of having a fake relationship with a woman online may miscalibrate their own mate value as a result. It's an interesting idea, that's for sure. Great question. And this one, I think we'll make this the last question. Will we? Um, yeah, we'll make this the last question. Sophie asks, can you explain why some objectively good-looking women prefer objectively ugly guys? Well, as I mentioned earlier, there's some evidence that better-looking men are generally less satisfied in relationships, and that when a man is better looking than the woman he is dating, he is less satisfied and interacts with her less positively within that relationship. There's even a study where they brought people into the lab and they had them on video, and the researchers noted that if the man had a better looking face than the woman, then they tended to have more negative interactions on both sides. Now, we can talk about why this may be. Maybe it's because men care more about looks than women on average. And so when there's a gap in one direction where the woman is better looking, she doesn't feel tons of strain. But when there's a gap in the other direction, the man feels kind of hard done by about it. I'm not saying this is how things should be. I'm just speculating as to how they might be. And that may cause more tension in one direction than the other. And so it's plausible to me that there are some women who, have gone through the dating market a few times, and they've learned either by watching their friends or by their own personal experience that better looking guys are a bit of a handful, and so they end up aiming lower. However, I will note here, Sophie, that on average, women tend to look better than men, and most people perceive most men as not that good looking, right? So sometimes you'll see a couple, and you'll think, oh, the woman is much better looking than the man. But for their percentile, when you correct for the fact that one is a man and one is a woman, they're actually relatively matched. But it's a good question. And we'll leave it at that. So thanks for some great questions today, guys. And if you want to ask me more, you can join the Hominid family for free.